I grew up in Marston's Mills, a tiny landlocked town in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where I attended public school through the 8th grade. Part of this education included Halloween parades, Thanksgiving pageants, and field trips to cultural sites in the area. A trip to Plymouth Rock, pictured here, and Plymouth Plantation was the major field trip of my 3rd grade year. I remember my mom chaperoning the trip and the seemingly endless bus ride over the Sagamore Bridge that connects the Cape to Plymouth County. These types of educational and cultural experiences function as pedagogical tools which form and reinforce histories of white America. Plymouth Plantation is a nonprofit living history museum or open-air museum, which was founded in 1947 and modeled after the 17th century colony of Plymouth. Using archival research and archaeological evidence, this type of museum recreates an indoor and outdoor environment modeled after a specific time period and location. The site is split up into 2 distinct areas, a recreation of the English Village and a Wampanoag home site. The English Village is staffed by actors who dress in period clothing, speak in dialect, and reenact the year 1627. It is an unscripted, improvised, and environmental performance which is meant to simulate life in Plymouth Colony. Unlike the people in the 17th century English Village, the staff in the Wampanoag home site are not role players. They are all native people, either Wampanoag or from other native nations, and they are dressed in historically accurate clothing, mostly made of deerskin and moose or raccoon fur. They are referred to as interpreters and speak from a modern perspective about Wampanoag history and culture. My talk today explores museums as sites of participatory performance where the historical narratives presented are understood as objective truth and internalized by viewers. Through the act of looking, the visitor performs the positionality of the museum and embodies a colonial gaze. Plymouth Plantation's website states, quote, "We provide powerful experiences to all who join us in an exploration of the past by engaging living history techniques, proven teaching methods, traditional storytelling, and cutting-edge technology," end quote. By engaging with the educational mission of Plymouth Plantation, that is, by learning through interacting, the visitor necessarily adopts the perspective of the institution. This institutional control is exerted through didactic demonstration, the presentation of objects as facts, and the regulation of the narrative itself. What visitors see and don't see is determined implicitly by this institutional control. As Jacques Derrida explains in Archive Fever, the archive is an imperial and epistemological space. He writes, quote, "There is no political power without control of the archive, if not of memory. Effective democratization can always be measured by this essential criterion: the participation in and access to the archive, its constitution, and its interpretation," end quote. The archive is therefore not simply the guardian or repository of history, but its legislating and enabling force. Control of the archive dictates what is knowable and visible. As an archive, Plymouth Plantation's legitimacy and cultural capital are corroborated by Massachusetts Department of Education, which structures the 3rd grade history and social science curriculum around, quote, "the history of Massachusetts from the time of the arrival of the Pilgrims," end quote. Before a visitor makes the trip to Plymouth, they are likely to visit Plymouth Plantation's website. By considering the website, the marketing and branding strategies expose fissures in the institution's educational objectives and performance mandates. While the institutional frame is inescapable and Plymouth Plantation struggles to illuminate a moment in history that is fraught and complex, it often works against its own infrastructure. The trademark slogan of the museum, "You can't change history, but it could change you," is printed on promotional material and on their website. This claim is powerful for its two distinct suggestions. First, the assumption that history is unchangeable presumes that it is already correct and complete. As it is presented and performed at Plymouth Plantation, this history is fixed and predetermined and cannot be changed by visitor interactions or interpretations. The second part of this sentence presents a possibility for change and growth in the viewer. Encountering this history via its interpreters can be a powerful personal experience. Plymouth Plantation can perhaps create new connections for viewers or alter their understanding of the history of the United States, Massachusetts, or personal genealogy. The italicized word emphasizes the contingent nature of this transformation. It is not a guarantee. Each individual interaction between an actor or an interpreter and a visitor has the potential to create an experience that is more accessible, effective, and individual than the archive alone has the potential to create. This would seem to be the underlying principle of living history museums, to create space for individual interpretations, imaginings, and experiences of the past. However, Plymouth Plantation's motto disregards the idea that one's personal and embodied experience has the potential to alter one's understanding of history. Also present on the website is an image of what appears to be a reenactment of a Thanksgiving meal. This image functions in opposition to Plymouth Plantation's mandate that the native interpreters not perform themselves. Two interpreters dressed in skins and fur hold a silver spoon and seem to be looking at their reflection in the convex surface of the shiny metal. The pilgrim man is looking at them, looking at themselves. Here, the mirror functions as a heterotopic space and a microcosm of the institution. The interpreter sees her image projected in the unreal, placeless, virtual space of the spoon. As Michel Foucault writes, quote, "From the standpoint of the mirror, I discover my absence from the place where I am, since I am over there," end quote. Similarly, the contemporary native body in the museum is the mirror image. It is a projection or reflection, which implies a historical absence. This image and the reenactment it depicts betrays an assumption about the Wampanoags as naive, uncivilized, and uneducated. Here they are mesmerized by a common utensil of dining etiquette. This fascination with shiny objects later led to deceptive trade deals, which took advantage of the Indians' unfamiliarity with certain objects. Inexpensive trinkets such as bells, beads, and metals were exchanged for valuable commodities such as animal pelts and land. Even if the premise is historically accurate, if the inaugural Thanksgiving feast did occur in the early 17th century, and a Wampanoag was surprised by her reflection in a spoon, this reenactment opposes the museum's mandate. These native interpreters at Plymouth are performing a caricature from the past rather than depicting a contemporary native message. This image supports stereotypes of Thanksgiving and of simple native people in order to bolster tourism and perpetuate a vision of a native body that is commercially viable and unthreatening to the public. Although visitors are told that interpreters are not role players, the interpreters here are dressed in historical native clothing. However, as these native interpreters speak English, their clothing allows viewers to aestheticize the native body and perpetuates the fantasy of an authentic native. The rupture between the historical native dress and the contemporary narrative allows for a fantasy about the idyllic past to remain visible. The staged quality of the interpreters' costumes and their repetitive demonstration of activities suggests that performance is being done in a way that perpetuates a historical fantasy and positions Native bodies as absent. The Native interpreters do not exist fully in either temporality. Their presence at Plymouth Plantation is incomplete in both contemporary and historical narratives. Their outfits and demonstrations act as signposts that highlight the fantasy of Native American bodies of the past and dismiss the contemporary reality. Ultimately, through interacting with the environment, the actors and the interpreters and the visitors participate in a pedagogical arc of the institution, while Plymouth Plantation perpetuates a colonial ideology.